Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we move away from the marble pillars of Greece and the shadows of the underworld, traveling further back than the memory of most men dares to go. We are journeying to the cradle of all things, to the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia, where the first cities rose from the dust and the first words were carved into the earth. Tonight, we settle into the story of the Anunnaki, the great return, and the mystery of the soul harvest. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let the weight of the modern world dissolve. Imagine the sky as it was then, unpolluted, vast, and heavy with stars that felt close enough to touch. As always, let me know where in the world you are listening from tonight. Get cozy, settle in, and let us begin. In the beginning, according to the clay of the Sumerians, there was no man to till the soil, no king to wear a crown, and no priest to offer a prayer. There was only the Abzu, the abyss of fresh waters, and the Tiamat, the salt sea chaos. But far beyond our blue horizon, tracing a path through the freezing velvet of the deep universe, moved a world called Nibiru. It was a planet of long winters and brief, burning summers, governed by an orbit that spanned 3,600 years. The inhabitants of this world, the Anunnaki, were not gods of spirit and light, but beings of immense longevity and terrifying brilliance. Yet, even the long-lived are subject to the decay of their home. Nibiru was dying. Its atmosphere, the golden shield that held its heat against the cold of the void, was thinning. Their scientists, masters of the subtle laws of the universe, realized that only one substance could save their world: gold. Not for wealth, but for its unique ability to be ground into a fine, suspended, dusty metallic veil to reflect the sun. And so, they looked toward the inner solar system, to the seventh planet, the jewel of the deep. They descended not as creators, but as miners. The first to touch the Persian Gulf was Enki, the lord of the deep. He was the eldest son of the king, a master of water and wisdom. He did not come alone. With him came the Ejigi, the lower ranks, the laborers, who would do the work the high lords refused to touch. They built Eridu, the first city on earth, a shimmering outpost of metal and light standing amidst the reeds. For ages, the Ejiji toiled. They dug into the veins of the earth, hollowing out the mountains to find the gold. For 40 periods of the Sar, they labored under a sun that was too bright and a gravity that felt like a leaden shroud. The Sumerian tablets tell us that the Ejiji groaned beneath the weight of their tasks. They grew weary of the endless digging. Discontent, like a slow-burning ember, began to spread. They cast their tools into the fires. They marched upon the dwelling of Enlil-Enki's stern brother. The air was thick with the scent of rebellion. The gods were at war with their own workers, and the gold, the lifeblood of Nibiru, stopped flowing. It was in this moment of crisis that the great assembly of the Anunnaki gathered. They could not return home empty-handed. Enki, the clever-hearted, stepped forward with a proposal that would echo through eternity. "There is a creature," Enki whispered, "a creature of the wild that walks upright. It has the strength of the beast, but it lacks the spark of the heavens. We shall place our own mark upon what already exists. We shall create a Lulu, mixed one, a worker who will bear the yoke of the gods and find joy in the labor we despise." But Enki's plan was deeper than mere flesh. He had to tether a piece of the infinite to the mud of the earth. He had to create a Vasila solar battery for the great cosmic cycle. The plan was set. The Skylords agreed, and thus the first seed of humanity was planted out of necessity. The great harvest had begun, and the great return was already etched into the calendar of the stars. With the decision made in the high assembly of the Anunnaki, the silence of the primordial earth was broken. Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, withdrew from the shimmering towers of Eridu and retreated to his secluded laboratory. The Abzu, the deep, subterranean place where the fresh waters of the earth met the hidden fires of the core. Beside him stood Ninhursag, the mother of the mountain, whose knowledge of the sacred formulas of existence rivaled his own. They did not seek to build a god, nor a mere animal. They sought the middle ground, the Lulu, the mixed one. To understand this alchemy, we must look past modern biology. The Sumerian tablets speak of the clay and the blood. Clay was the genetic code of the hominid that already wandered the African plains. It was a creature of strength and instinct, but its eyes remained fixed on the ground. It had no concept of the stars or memory of the before. "We shall bind the wild one to our own essence," Enki declared, his voice echoing in the vaulted chambers. The process was long and fraught with shadow. The tablets tell of many failures, creatures with eyes that could not see. Ninhursag wept for them, but the demand for gold from Nibiru was a whip that never ceased its cracking. Finally, the formula was perfected. They took the essence of a young Anunnaki leader, sacrifice of blood and spirit. This was the Antha heavenly spark. They wove this thread into the clay of the earth creature. It was a bridge built between the mud of the riverbank and the cold, crystalline vacuum of the heavens. When the first Lulu opened his eyes, he did not howl like the beast, he sighed. It was the first human breath, a sound of profound recognition and immediate sorrow. For in that moment, man was given a gift that was also a cage, the soul. The soul was intended to be a biological battery, storing the vast emotional energy that the Anunnaki had begun to lose. By tethering infinite energy to a physical body that would age and die, they created a cycle of constant friction. This was the mixing of the blood. Man was now a creature of two worlds. His mind was sparked with the light of Nibiru, forever gazing upward, haunted by a home he had never seen. Ninhursag held the first man, and she felt the heat of his skin. "He is finished," she whispered. "He will dig the gold, he will clear the channels, he will bear the burden of the Ajiji." But as Adapa looked into the eyes of his creators, a flicker of something unexpected moved behind his gaze. The Anunnaki had their worker, but they had also birthed a witness, a creature that would one day demand to know why. The work in the mines resumed. The gold began to flow once more toward the dying atmosphere of Nibiru. The silence was replaced by the clinking of shovels and the soft, melodic chanting of the Lulu. They sang songs they did not understand to a sky that did not yet answer. As the first generation of the Lulutha mixed ones took their place in the sun-drenched valleys of Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki realized that their creation was more than a mere tool. These beings, fashioned from the dust of the earth and the blood of the stars, possessed a strange, quiet grace. They were efficient, they were tireless, and for a time they were silent. To house their most prized workers and to cultivate the exotic flora, the Anunnaki established the Edin in the modern tongue. We call it Edin, but to the Sumerians it was the plain of the righteous ones. It was a walled sanctuary, a lush laboratory of biological wonders where the four rivers met in a shimmering confluence of life. In the Edin, the Lulu were not just miners, they were gardeners. They tended to the tree of life, which was likely a sophisticated biological station that regulated the health of the Anunnaki lords. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and cedar, and the water was so pure it tasted of light. For the humans, it was a paradise of ignorance. They served their radiant masters with a devotion that was absolute, but Enki, the Lord of Wisdom, watched his creation with a growing paternal complexity. He had given them a soul to store energy, yes, but he had also given them a mind. The Sumerian tablets tell of a second tree in the center of the Edin, the tree of knowledge. In the esoteric traditions of the soul harvest, this was the frequency of self-awareness. To the High Commander, Enlil, this tree was a danger. He believed the Lulu should remain as perfect, obedient vessels. Let them eat of the fruit of the earth, Enlil commanded. But let them never taste the fruit of the spirit. For Enlil, the human was a crop. A soul was a fruit that needed to be kept sweet through simple living. If a human became self-aware, the energy became bitter with defiance, heavy with the weight of questioning. But Enki, the serpent of wisdom, could not leave his masterpiece unfinished. He saw that without knowledge, they were merely shadows. One evening, as the silver light of Nibiru's sister moons cast long shadows, Enki approached the first man and woman. He showed them that the world was not just a place of labor, but a place of choice. He opened their eyes, not to sign, but to individuality. The moment they realized they were separate from their masters, the moment they felt the first spark of privacy, the Edin changed. When Enlil walked through the garden and felt the shift in the vibration of the air, he knew the workers were no longer biological machines. They were looking at the stars and seeing not just their master's home, but their own potential. The Lulu has become as one of us, Enlil raged, his voice like the thunder that precedes a desert storm. They know good and evil. They will no longer toil in the silence of the beast. The eviction from the Edin was not a punishment for a moral failing, but a quarantine. The self-aware humans were cast out into the wild to fend for themselves, to labor in the sweat of their brows. Enlil hoped that the harshness of the wilderness would break their spirits, making their souls sweet and submissive once more. But the seed had been planted. Man was out in the world, carrying a spark of the Anunnaki fire in a vessel of clay, and the masters began to realize that their workers might one day become their successors. As the centuries bled into millennia, the Lulu, the mixed ones, multiplied and spread across the fertile crescent. They were no longer the frightened experiments of the Abzu. They were a civilization. But as they built their brick-lined streets and arched gateways, the Anunnaki realized they had created something far more potent than a simple miner. In the union of the earth clay and the divine blood, a third thing had been born, the human emotional spectrum. To understand why this was so vital to the gods, we must understand the nature of the Anunnaki themselves. These were beings of cold, crystalline logic who lived for thousands of years. Their longevity came at a price. Their emotional lives had become flat. Humans, however, were the opposite. Because our lives were short, every moment was charged with a terrifying, beautiful intensity. In the secret scrolls of the Sumerian priesthood, it is whispered that the Anunnaki discovered that intense human emotion produced energy they called Luce. It was a golden, ethereal byproduct of consciousness, celestial honey, used to sustain their own fading vitality and power their strange technologies. The Anunnaki began to tune the human experience. They realized the greatest yield of energy came from the friction of opposites. They established the first great city-states gish, Lagash and Urukand placed themselves as the god-kings at the center of all life. They built the ziggurats, those massive, stepped pyramids that pierced the clouds. In reality, they were massive resonance chambers. When the thousands gathered to chant or offer sacrifice, the Lush was channeled upward through the stone and transmitted to the orbiting Shem. The Anunnaki introduced the first systems of duality, sacred and profane, loyalty and treason. They taught humans how to wage war. Yet, they also taught humans how to love with a desperate intensity, for the grief of a lost lover produced a frequency reserved for royalty within the human body. Enki had installed the chakra's 7 energy centers that acted as transformers for this cosmic power. Every emotion you feel is a ripple in a vast, invisible ocean of energy. The masters ensured the soil was tilled with enough hardship, but a shadow was falling over the Edin. The humans were beginning to develop something the masters hadn't anticipated: complex memory. They were starting to wonder why their gods were so hungry for their praise. The frequency of the earth was shifting, and in the high halls of Nibiru, the decision was made to reset the garden. The great cycle of the Sartha 3,600-year orbit was drawing to a close. According to the celestial mechanics recorded on the Enuma Elish, the planet Nibiru was once again swinging inward toward our sun. As it approached, its massive gravitational wake acted like a giant, invisible hand, stirring the oceans and tugging at the tectonic plates of the earth. The world was groaning. The very air felt charged with a static tension that made the animals flee to the highlands and the birds fall silent. In the high council of the Anunnaki, the atmosphere was one of cold calculation. Enlil, the lord of the command, stood before the assembly. He had grown weary of the clamor of humanity. To him, the humans were no longer the pristine workers they once were. They had become noisy, full of ego, and increasingly difficult to harvest. The luge was becoming bitter with the tang of rebellion. "The harvest is tainted," Enlil declared. His voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates. "The Lulu have overstepped. They have tasted the knowledge of the gods, and they no longer bow with the purity of the beast. Let the coming tide do its work. We shall not intervene. We shall let the earth be washed clean of this unruly seed." He forced every member of the Anunnaki to take a blood oath of silence. They were to withdraw to their celestial crafts, the Shemzand wait in the safety of the heavens, while the planet underwent its violent transition. But Enki, the lord of the waters and the creator of man, could not endure the thought of his masterpiece being extinguished. He saw the Ansparktha divine light shining in the eyes of the humans, and he knew that if they perished, a part of the universe's own soul would die. Enki was bound by the oath, but he was the master of the hidden word. He traveled to the house of Zeus Rudra, a man whose DNA remained pure and whose heart was attuned to the ancient frequencies. Enki did not speak to the man directly. Instead, he sat behind the reed wall and spoke to the wall itself. "Wall, wall, reed wall, pay heed to my instructions," Enki whispered. He instructed Zeusudra to build AMA.GUR.GUR boat, shaped like a seed that could roll and tumble in the chaos of a world-ending storm. The skies turned the color of bruised fruit. The sun became a pale, ghostly disk, and the moon seemed to vibrate in its orbit. The Anunnaki ascended in their chariots of fire, their exhaust trails marking the sky like white scars. As they climbed higher, they looked back and saw the ice caps of the south sliding into the ocean. The roar was unlike anything heard before. It was the sound of the planet screaming. The fountains of the deep broke open. For 6 days and 7 nights, the world was a void of darkness and spray. From their orbiting ships, the Anunnaki watched the loosh of millions of souls flickering out like candles in a gale. The goddess Ishtar shrieked like a woman in childbirth when she saw the bodies of her people filling the sea like dragonflies. The masters realized, too late, that the Creator is forever bound to the created. Without the humans, the gods were merely ghosts. When the rain finally stopped and the silence of the grave settled over the earth, the Ma.Gur.Gur came to rest on the peaks of the mountains. Ziusudra opened the hatch and let out a raven, then a dove. When he finally stepped onto the mud, the world was unrecognizable. The great cities of gold were gone. The harvest had been cleared, but in the heart of one man, the memory of the stars remained. When the waters finally receded, Ziusudra offered a sacrifice of sweet-smelling cedar and incense. The Anunnaki, hungry and weakened after their long vigil in orbit, gathered like flies over the smoke. They were desperate for the connection, for the luge that only a living, breathing human could provide. Enlil was initially enraged to find that the human seed had survived his purge. He stood on the mountainside, ready to strike down the survivors, but Enki stepped forward. He is not just a worker, Enki argued. He is the carrier of our legacy. If you destroy him, you destroy the only thing in this universe that remembers our names. Enlil eventually relented, but he demanded a new contract. This new Eri, the one we now call history, would be different. The Anunnaki would no longer walk openly among men. They would move behind the veil. They granted man the kingship which was lowered from heaven, along with the arts of agriculture, mathematics, and law. But they also left us with a terrible gift, the gift of forgetfulness. They modified the human frequency once more, scrambling the common language and the common memory so that we would no longer remember our true origins. We were left in a world of ruins, told to build a new civilization on the bones of the old one. We were given the calendar, which was not a tool for us, but a countdown for them. The Great Return is the central prophecy of the Sumerian soul science. It is the understanding that the 3,600-year orbit of Nibiru is a cosmic clock. Every time the winged disk returns to our skies, the harvest must be graded. The masters do not return as saviors. They return as auditors. They look at the yield of the planet, the quality of the consciousness we have produced. We live today in the shadow of that coming return. If you look at our modern world, you can see the ancient machinery of the harvest still at work. Why is our society designed to keep us in a state of constant, high-frequency stress? Why are we bombarded with fear through our screens, with conflict in our politics, and with a restless desire for things we do not need? To the student of the Sumerian tablets, the answer is clear. The harvest is being optimized. In the digital age, the ziggurat has become the network. The loosh is no longer collected through stone temples, but through the glowing rectangles in our palms. Every moment of outrage, every spike of anxiety, every desperate like is a drop of golden energy being funneled into the invisible reservoirs of the watchers. We are being milked for our attention and our emotion on a global scale. But there is a secret hope that Enki hid deep within our genetic coda time-release awakening. He knew that eventually the human soul would grow too large for its cage. He knew that one day we would realize that the energy we provide to the gods is actually our own birthright. The Sumerian tablets suggest that as the Great Return approaches, the veil will thin. People will start to remember. They will start to feel a strange ancestral pull toward the stars. They will begin to realize that they are not sinners or slaves, but biological vessels of an infinite cosmic force. As you drift into the deep, quiet waters of sleep tonight, feel the stillness of your room. You are more than the labor you perform. You are more than the taxes you pay or the fears you harbor. You are a bridge between the mud of the earth and the gold of Nibiru. The Anunnaki may have been the architects of your flesh, but they are not the masters of your light. The stars are moving. The 3,600-year cycle is turning. The garden is ripening. But this time, when the harvesters return, they may find that the crop has learned how to walk, how to speak, and how to shine with a light that rivals their own. Sleep now, child of the Edin. Sleep and dream of the time before the veil. For in your dreams, the harvest cannot reach you. In your dreams, you are already home. Good night.